You're watching Eye on Africa here on France 24. I'm Julia Kim, and these are the headlines on the continent. Ivory Coast welcomes French President Emmanuel Macron as he makes his traditional Christmas visit to French troops in Africa. His ouster ushered in one of the most brutal periods of violence in Central African Republic's history. After nearly 7 years in exile, former President François Bozizé has returned to his country. Crushed to death, paralyzed for life, an unknown number of children in DR Congo are being killed or maimed in the frenzy to mine cobalt. We'll speak to author and activist Siddharth Kara, who's helped launch a landmark class action lawsuit on behalf of the families against US tech giants. But first, French President Emmanuel Macron is making his annual visit to troops stationed in Africa. He's in Ivory Coast at the moment, sharing a Christmas meal with French forces stationed near the capital, Abidjan. Macron's visit to West and Central Africa comes as Paris attempts to strengthen security cooperation amid a growing jihadist insurgency in the Sahel region. This month saw the deaths of 13 French troops in a helicopter collision in Mali, and just a week later, extremists killed 71 local soldiers in Niger. This Sunday, he'll meet with Niger's president to pay homage to the fallen men. Here's President Macron delivering his annual holiday address to troops earlier.
Barkhane is an essential mission for France. We will continue to fight against jihadists, and we will continue to do so alongside our African partners, our European and international partners. This is also why I would like for the region's heads of state to come to Pau on January 13th to meet with me and re-clarify the political and strategic framework for the Barkhane mission. We cannot act efficiently without their full political engagement.
Now, his ouster ushered in one of the most brutal periods of violence in Central African Republic's history. After nearly 7 years in exile, former President François Bozizé is back. His political party announced that he would address the nation in the coming days. Bozizé had been forced out by a coalition of mostly Muslim rebel groups. Their oppressive rule then led to the rise of another armed group, the anti-Balaka. What followed was years of deadly sectarian conflict, as Maud Julien reports.
He was the Central African Republic's president for 10 years. François Bozizé was ousted in March 2013 when Seleka rebels took control of the capital. 6 years of exile followed in Cameroon and then Uganda. On Thursday, his much-anticipated return to Bangui was confirmed by the government.
La dignité due à son rang.
The dignity associated with his former responsibilities will be recognized. But this does not elude the fact that this situation raises several questions, which the government, in line with the international community, will deal with responsibly.
The spokesperson was referring to allegations that the former president supported the anti-Balaka militias, accused of killing thousands of people. François Bozizé is still under UN sanctions and targeted by an international arrest warrant. He was not allowed to fly to the CAR, and it's still not clear how he traveled to the country. It's expected he'll run for president in 2020, and one of the conditions to be allowed to take part in the race is to be in the country at least 1 year ahead of the poll.
That was Maud Julien reporting there. Well, let's take a look at some other stories making news on the continent. And Guinea's opposition is accusing the president of staging a constitutional coup as anti-government protests that have killed 20 people continue. On Thursday, Alpha Condé announced a new draft constitution, which critics fear he'll use to seek a third term in 2020. That prospect has prompted hundreds of thousands of Guineans to take to the streets every week since October. Condé has not yet confirmed whether he plans to run again. A nationwide march against the government is due to take place on December 26th. Protesters in Algeria have once again taken to the streets to reject the election of new President Abdelmadjid Tebboune. They say he's the puppet of a corrupt ruling elite, but some are debating whether to accept his offer of dialogue. Tebboune praised the movement for renewing Algerian politics, but has yet to address calls for a radical systemic overhaul. Weekly mass protests have been rolling on since February, leading to the ouster of longtime President Abdelaziz Bouteflika in April. And Ethiopia's first ever satellite has been launched into space by China. The 3-year project by Chinese and Ethiopian engineers cost some $8 million, most of which was covered by Beijing. It aims to help the East African nation save money by gathering its own satellite data. Ethiopia's Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed is credited with starting the program while he was Minister for Technology. In a congratulatory message to his country, he hinted that this was the first of more satellites to come. Now, in DR Congo, children are literally risking life and limb to find cobalt, an essential component in every smartphone battery. Approximately 2/3 of the world's cobalt is mined in DR Congo, and in the frenzy to meet soaring demand from big tech, suppliers are turning to an informal workforce of so-called artisanal miners. Well, for the first time, a landmark class action lawsuit has been launched in the US against America's tech giants, Apple, Google, Dell, Microsoft, and Tesla. The case has been filed by a US NGO on behalf of 14 Congolese families whose children have been crushed to death in unsafe tunnels or maimed for life. Well, Siddharth Kara is one of the expert witnesses to the lawsuit, and he joins us live on this program. Thank you very much for being with us tonight. Now, you've been to these mines and you've spoken to the families affected. Can you describe the kinds of conditions these children are working in?
Well, the conditions are utterly subhuman. In fact, that discovery, when I conducted my first research trip in the summer of 2018, the laying my eyes on the broad scale human and environmental destruction being caused by cobalt mining led me to pursue this action, to put together a team to try to hold companies accountable for the subhuman existence and rampant exploitation of the people of the Congo.
Now, of course, this lawsuit is being brought forward in the US. Why have you decided to do it in the US and not in the DR Congo?
Well, the U.S. has a set of robust laws that are useful in trying to hold companies accountable. And the companies that we want to hold accountable are also incorporated in the United States and should be held to the standards of U.S. law. So the plaintiffs I've recruited and identified in the Congo have all lost a child or had a child suffer grievous injury in a cobalt mine linked to these large America-based consumer-facing technology companies, and they need to be held accountable for that.
Now, I've read in the document that the plaintiffs spoke out anonymously for fear of reprisals. There isn't a single person that's actually named in the actual lawsuit. What kind of reprisals are we talking about, and from whom?
Well, anonymity is crucial, and that was one of the conditions I made clear when I recruited the plaintiffs, that their confidentiality would be protected at all costs. And that is because, as you rightfully note, they can face severe reprisals. And those reprisals would come from local military, informal militia, mining officials, or other people who have a deep investment in the mass amount of money that is being made on the backs of the penny wage exploited peasants and children of the southeastern Congo.
Now, some of the fatalities and injuries, they allegedly happened at sites owned by one of the world's largest mining companies, Glencore. Can you tell us a bit more about their alleged involvement in this case?
Well, I've been to dozens of informal and formal industrial, artisanal and industrial cobalt mines in the DRC, some of which are owned by Glencore, others owned by other major international mining companies. And I've seen with my own eyes hundreds of women, men, and children mining cobalt informally and artisanally on those sites, and accidents happen. Pit walls collapse, shattering people's spines or legs, but it's the tunnel digging that is particularly hazardous. Young boys and men go down in these tunnels that they dig with shovels up to 80, 90, 100 feet underground, and the tunnels collapse. And everyone who's inside is buried alive. And that's the risk they're taking to get the cobalt out of the ground at sites owned by Glencore and other major companies. And that cobalt then flows up to all the major tech companies whose gadgets we buy.
Now, we're of course talking about children working really at the very bottom of that supply chain. As you say, it goes all the way up to these tech companies who then use it to sell smartphones, laptops, etc. I mean, is it a possibility that some of these big companies just didn't know that child labor was being used? Because I think Google and Apple and some of them have actually come out and said that they had no idea that this was happening.
Well, I'm afraid it's difficult for me to take that statement at face value. I think they're all quite aware that there is child labor and exploited labor at the bottom of their cobalt supply chains. They may not be aware of the daily visceral hazards, horrors, and death, but they're aware in general that there is child labor and exploited labor, injury and death in the mining of cobalt in their supply chains. And I invite every CEO of any company that buys cobalt from the Congo, come with me. I will take you to see the children caked in toxic grime and filth mining your cobalt, and I will show you how it's linked to your supply chain. And then once you lay your eyes on that, I'm quite confident you'll work with me and other colleagues to address these issues.
Okay, Siddharth Kara, I'm afraid we'll have to leave it there, but thank you very much for being with us on Eye on Africa tonight. And that's it for this edition of Eye on Africa. There's more news coming up. Stay tuned to France 24.